Have you ever felt stuck in what feels like a feedback loop of knowing you have a problem, researching a solution, feeling like you're trying the solution, and then feeling like you're right back at square one? If so, you are not alone. I have helped so many women, and let me explain to you the process, how it works, and how to get out of that, right? So many high achievers, so many ambitious women. One thing that they have that's a good thing is both a blessing and the curse is their intellect, right? So they are thinking, they're using their minds to solve problems and to analyze, right? But also what they're doing is sometimes they're using their own mind and their own analysis and overthinking against themselves. So let's back up a little bit and let's get to where the root of why a lot of us get stuck, right? Part of it is, or the main thing, the core is the narrative that we tell ourselves. So we are our stories, right? Have you ever heard that? Who we are is how we identify, or who we are is our identity, which comes from the story that we tell ourselves. This creates narratives, and these narratives are the product of a lot of conditioning, some very direct, some indirect. Things that we, for example, were told explicitly by our parents and the people in our families. Things that we just picked up on and overheard. Things that we observed and that were modeled for us in terms of like how you should be, whether you should be someone who is proud of who you are and speaks about what you do versus being someone that's told, no, it's bragging, it's being prideful, it's not being humble if you were to speak about your achievements, right? So the narratives that we have in our minds that are ingrained come from all sorts of sources, not just our families, but like our families, what they said directly, what they did, and what they said indirectly, but also the people around us, our friend group, the society in general, right? What are the messages that are given in society? And a lot of times our family of origin, our family, the people that raised us, they aren't aware of the stories that they have that they therefore are passing down. They also aren't cognizant or aware enough to think about how to counter some of the negative stories or messages that we might take in as kids. So that's why it's really, really important. This is sort of a side note, right? But it's really, really important to think about like, what are the things that you are absorbing and taking in, things that you have absorbed and taken in that might not be beneficial to you. You might have heard messages like money is the root of all evil. Therefore, you're conflicted about having the goal to earn and acquire and build wealth, right? You might have heard that it's a bad thing to speak with pride about what you've accomplished and what you've done. You're told that that's being haughty or stuck up, right? And a lot of times if our parents didn't even recognize that they either were giving us those messages or we were taking in those messages, they didn't know to counter the messages. So at some point we have to be able to learn to counter the messages ourselves. We have to learn what the messages are that we're taking in now, that we took in then, and then how can we counter them, right? But what happens for most of us is we just have these stories. We have one grand story that we understand or believe about ourselves, sometimes without knowing it. And we have all of these narratives that are playing in, usually around our own capability and who's responsible for us, right? A lot of the narratives that we have about ourselves try to cast someone else. They try to put someone in the role of the villain. And what that does is it might make us feel good in the moment, right? That there's somebody who did this to us. It's somebody's fault. Even the way I'm describing these narratives, right? It's almost like they did it, society did it. But what happens is when we create this one villain, what we do is we relinquish, we give up our control to that villain, to that person that made us the way we are and did all of this to us. And so it then becomes this, like, we feel like powerless even without knowing it, right? So that's part of it, right? We have this big story about who we are. And usually it's a story that is filled with lack, what we can't do, what we're not good enough for, ways that we're deficient. We have all of these little narratives, and usually these narratives are looking for who's the hero and who's the villain. And usually those narratives are telling us that both the villain and the hero lie outside of us. And that takes a lot of our control from ourselves. So what ends up happening where we get stuck is we get to a point where when we are frustrated, we are fed up, we don't like where we are, either in our relationships. That's where I work with a lot of women. They don't like where communication is with their partner. They don't like how they're feeling misunderstood and unseen and unheard, right? But what happens is, because we're so used to looking for a villain and even a hero outside of ourselves, we point all of the blame on that person. So even as we come for help and we're saying that we're stuck, there's already this narrative like that I am helpless to really truly change this, that nothing's going to change unless something or someone else outside of me changes. And that's a very dangerous proposition. Now, let me be clear. We don't always do this consciously. A lot of this is really subconscious, where we have been taught to buy into this narrative. And so when we are frustrated, especially when it involves another person or situation outside of ourselves, even when we come for help, we've already come in a way and with a posture of helplessness, so to speak. And so just keep in mind that narrative is in the backdrop. And then you are confronted as the person who is stuck, who wants to change, who takes the brave step of coming for help, not really understanding your subconscious narratives that are going on. You're coming and you're almost, automatically by default skeptical of the suggestions and the alternative ways that are being suggested to you by whoever's helping you. So for example, with me, I'm the coach, right? So people I'm coaching, there's a bit of skepticism. There's a sense of, oh, this is just going to be like everything else that didn't work. There's a sense of, I can try all this, but it's not going to work unless he or she or whoever that entity outside of you is, unless that thing or that person changes, right? So we're already, some people, coming into the situation where we're saying we want to change with skepticism that change is even possible. That's why, as the coach, it is so important that I really tackle those narratives, that story, that identity that you didn't even know that you had, right? Because the pattern is you come for help, you're skeptical. Then when you try the thing, you're still like, you're still going to give it a good go. You try the suggestions, the shifts, the mindset things, all of the things, the homeworks that you're given. And then the moment that you feel discomfort, right? Because you making a shift sort of makes you confront these narratives. And that's very uncomfortable. It causes discomfort. It causes what we call cognitive dissonance. There's a disconnect. And so we try the things, but then we kind of are rejecting the things. Part of us is, without knowing it, rejecting the things. And then it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We self-sabotage without knowing it, because we say, you know what? I tried it, it didn't work. They told me that I shouldn't catastrophize. This is one big thing that so many of the women I work with do, like making a mountain out of a molehill, thinking that the worst case scenario is going to happen. You say, you know what? That one time you told me not to worry, what happened? I got into a car accident. What happened? I didn't, my toddler was banging on the door, or, my child called me and I told them to wait and they got hurt, or I got into an accident, right? So people are sort of expecting the worst case scenario because they're not believing they can truly, truly change because of that narrative and that story and that identity they have in themselves. And it creates this loop where you say you want to change, and earnestly, there's part of you that really, really does. But until you tackle that underlying subconscious, you're always going to be in conflict with the change. You're always going to be in conflict with the change. And what's going to happen is, when you try the thing, you dip your toe in the water, you're still skeptical. You're like, this is cold. This is not working for me. I got to get out. And then you say, you see, I knew it. It reaffirms and it almost comforts you, because that story is almost like a resistance and it's pulling you back to the old ways of being, right? And this is a pattern that I observe. I observe it especially early on when working with women through coaching. And that's why it's so important. That's why I have to tap into and tackle that's the story, the narrative, the identity. Now, these are things that I observe even before people become my clients, right? So these aren't things that I just am going to go around telling people, because part of when I'm coaching on feminine energy too is you have to learn to be in a state of being receptive, of receiving feedback, of receiving coaching, of allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to look at those patterns and look at what wasn't working before and look at the ways that you were stuck, right? So for those who are ready to receive, it is a powerful enlightenment to see the patterns, to understand how to disrupt them, to get at what you've been avoiding, to get at what the narratives and the story and the false identity are protecting you from, and to learn that you have the courage and you can be brave enough to confront those things and to dismantle, as we call it, like break down the old narratives and let's construct something new. But in order to do that, it's a journey that is so difficult alone. Yes, you can read the books, you can watch the videos, right? And I think that is so powerful, but it's so much more intense, and so much change and so many shifts happen when you can do that either in community or with the help or guide of a coach or someone who's really familiar with these patterns and how they're stopping you. Okay? So let me know, how have you been telling yourself false narratives? How have you adopted a false story and a false identity? And are you ready to break that pattern and get unstuck? This is Dr. Nicole. You can see all the other videos that deal with this. Make sure you subscribe, like this video, and subscribe to the channel.